everybody, I'm excited to have our Lunch and Learn with you all, HR executives. Our topic today is innovation storytelling. So how can we tell stories to motivate our team, inspire our people, and just drive engagement for our companies? As HR executives, we're doing a lot to drive the team forward, to get our people up to snuff, to really do things that make our work environment meaningful and powerful. And stories are massive in terms of helping us get there. I've got an awesome speaker with us today. Susan Lindner is here to help us talk about how can we tell stories innovatively and ultimately inspire people to do the work we like them to do. Susan Lindner is a cultural anthropologist, brand marketer, and disruptor. Susan got her start as an AIDS educator in brothels in Thailand, where she helped turn prostitutes into entrepreneurs. Today, she's the founder of Emerging Media, where she helps innovators and disruptors create the stories that get them resources, recognition, and runway. Susan, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Garrett.
So, Susan, let's talk about innovation storytelling. I guess really, what is innovation? I mean, I think we've heard of the term storytelling before. I guess, what's the difference between normal storytelling and innovation storytelling?
Well, regular storytelling is the stuff that you heard your grandmother say to you at night, right? It's the way that, frankly, all human wisdom has been passed from one to another. It's the way that we start off with a character, we imbue a lot of emotion, and we get to hopefully a happy ending. Or if you're Stephen King, maybe not. But innovation storytelling is a whole different breed of story, and that's because innovators are charged with leading us into a future that we cannot yet see. They're asking us to take some new product or service that's new to the market and go, how do I incorporate this into my life? How do I make it meaningful? How do I figure out how to leapfrog what I'm currently doing and use this cool new thing? And so innovation storytelling requires us to have the trust level and the ability to describe a future we cannot yet see. And there's two other elements of innovation storytelling. So innovators typically really good at innovating, not so great at storytelling. Most of our technical folks never get that kind of training, right? They're taught to speak in the scientific. So most folks who come up with brand new innovations in the R&D department and engineering and product, they go, look at my cool new thing. Let me tell you about the thousands of features that I've built into this beautiful thing. Now you go figure out what it means and how it works and how it will work in your world. But that's not enough anymore. And in order for an innovation to take off internally, in order for someone to have success in connecting with other departments of an organization to get them to build it and to get excited about it, we also have to build virality into an innovation story so that other people can pass the message forward, so that they can explain this very complex thing into the person sitting next to them. They can share the story in a way that all of us can understand. And that's the hardest part.
That's interesting. So there's a lot of key things here. I mean, I think like as an HR executive, I'm probably thinking to myself, like, that's really cool. My team, there are probably a lot of people that come up with innovations, but I'm thinking to myself, how can I go about empowering my people to tell that story? And really, maybe is it possible for me to come up with some new innovation, even if I don't have a technical background? How can I create innovative stories to almost start by leading by example, by telling stories that are motivating to other people on my team?
Yeah, well, I might recommend the first thing like Jeff Bezos did, which was to outlaw PowerPoint at Amazon. Right? His approach, first and foremost, was start with the story. And if it starts with an engineering equation, or it starts with an Excel spreadsheet, you're doing it wrong. So storytelling has become an executive leadership must. Indra Nooyi at Pepsi said it was the most important skill. Steve Jobs said the most important person in the world is the storyteller, because he is the one who shares the mission, the vision, and the values. And for our HR sisters and brothers, they are on the front line of leading change. And we also, we often don't think about it that way, but every new HR policy, every new piece of software that employee has to log on to, every time there's a shift in benefits, that's an innovation. It may be incremental, but it's a shift. And you have to get people on board. And that starts with being a great listener to understand what people want, and a great storyteller to say, here's why it matters to you. Here's how it will make your life better if you go forward and implement the process change that I'm asking you to. And if we're in the executive leadership and development role in HR, it's empowering our leaders to tell stories so that their legions of employees will follow them. If you have 3,000 people under you, you have to be able to tell a story that you can tell to your top lieutenants, and then they can share that story with the rest of the rank and file employees, right? So it's important that we empower people to tell stories so that stories spread and take hold in an organization. And that's why every person needs to become a better storyteller so that we communicate more effectively with one another.
I was just about to say that because I feel like I've spoken with enough HR executives, and one of the biggest things that I hear in terms of when I hear venting and challenges is organizational change. I feel like when there's a new initiative that needs to be started, or that is, as a company, we decided we're going to go and invest in this, we're going to go do this thing, it's met with resistance. Why? People inherently resist change. Makes a lot of sense. But as the HR executive, it's really difficult to fight that uphill battle. How can stories play a role with helping us achieve a lot more continuity and a lot more support for the change initiatives we're trying to implement?
Yeah. So start off with that figure. So imagine you're going to be implementing a new PeopleSoft program, right? Some kind of new initiative, a new timesheet platform. Can we begin by telling the story of, I want to tell you an example of Anita, right, in accounting. Every day, Anita comes in and she logs into her current software system, and typically she gets an error message. Anita can't pull up her last 4 weeks of timesheets because the system is down once again. Worse yet, Anita wants to build her new vacation plan, right? She has a new child and she's dying to go on vacation, but alas, the old system lets her down. She can't tell how many vacation days she has left and whether or not she's actually taking out her paid time off or her not paid time off. The system isn't working anymore for Anita, which is why we're switching to insert new software name here. Anita is now piloting this program for us, and what she's found is not only is she able to figure out her time off, but she's able to plot her vacation for the next year and the next year, coinciding perfectly with that beautiful new timeshare she got. So can we think about, now that Anita is time is spent in 15 minutes planning her vacation, she can get back to work. She can focus on what Anita does best, which is rounding out a killer year for the company on the accounting side. And by the way, Anita goes home with a peace of mind knowing that she's going back to Disney World this year and the next 3 years to come. Like, how can we make this story about the people that we love in our organization rather than thinking about it as combat every time we have to implement a new process change?
I love it. And I loved the idea of using a third-party story. I can't remember where the research came from. I was speaking with a friend of mine who he was citing some research on when the companies ask their employees, like, what is your likelihood of taking company resources and using it for your own personal use? The answer is most people are going to say, no, I don't do that. But if you were to ask the question, what is the likelihood that other people in the company are taking resources and are using it for personal use, you're much more likely to get an actual response of how they would actually react in a certain situation. And the reason why I bring up this research, this information, is because I think that's so powerful when it comes to these stories. If we're not talking about you or I, we're talking about a third party, it makes it a whole lot easier to empathize with that person and not make it personal. It's like, hey, no, this isn't beneficial for me. This is beneficial for Anita. And then it's a lot easier to say, hey, we're trying to do this so then everyone can know when their vacation days are, which I think is a really powerful thing.
Well, it's the classic, like, oh, my friend has a problem, right? I wonder if you might know, a friend of mine has a problem, right? And that's how we've always done it. So, right, you see how we're hardwired to tell stories about this friend of mine, right? Who's experiencing this change. But, the other thing for HR leaders, when I work with companies like GE or Corning and, their HR departments, it's about training executives to become better storytellers in order to create empathy. And to create some kind of back and forth between them and their top employees. I mean, by manager, let's say, and for their managers to also learn new ways of empathizing with their employees. And it's about connecting people back to mission and purpose and the things that get them excited each quarter about meeting a new initiative or a new goal. So getting in the habit of storytelling is opening a two-way street of communication. And when you can also figure out, okay, this is resonating with people, this is not resonating with people, that's knowledge about how to affect change over the long term and to, really put the resources in people's hands to share what's working and what's not. You're opening up venues of not a one-way conversation, but a two-way conversation to get more stuff done and to make people more content at work.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That makes a lot of sense. I just like, there's a lot of areas that we could apply this, but I want to talk about our mentoring relationship because all of our HR executives right now, we're in a mentoring relationship.
Right.
And I'd love to learn your thoughts on how can stories play a role in this mentoring relationship? How can we go about building that greater level of empathy like you were talking about in our mentoring relationship?
So, there's nothing I'd love better than to see story hours set up in companies around the country. That's my dream, especially for innovators who get, kind of trapped in all the technical language and stuff like that, to really start talking to others. So could you set up a lunch and learn just like this one, but where employees go around the horn and share a story, where they experience the vision, the mission, the values, and call out other people on the team where they've experienced them expressing those values? Could you ask them to call out a really difficult exchange with a thorny customer and say, I remembered the story that my boss told me when he first joined the company about how hard it was for him, and that helped me get through that really difficult customer interaction. Or I remembered so-and-so, Edison, back when he started at GE, he had 10,000 failures before making the light bulb. And me here in R&D thinking about, wow, I'm on try number 7,000. I can still go forward. Those stories exist in our four walls to serve us, to lift us and support us. They're not just ornamental. It's not just some piece of, historical wallpaper. Stories are designed to teach us how to move forward into a future we don't know yet. So I'd ask HR leaders to start circulating those amazing stories more frequently, because they will serve as a buoy and a lift to your employees now, and encourage them to create some new ones.
Yeah, and I think that can also even buoy our mentoring relationships. I feel like where they are associated with stories, so let's say for these HR executives that are matched with each other for these mentoring relationships, those stories are what gets you coming back. They stick. They're the things that you think about when you're thinking about your next meeting. You're thinking to yourself like, man, how can I help my fellow mentor? How can they help me? You're thinking about the stories that they've told you, and that is what makes you sticky in their mind, and that's what makes them sticky in your mind. And so, yeah, I'd love to learn. Are there any tactics that you like to leverage in a mentoring relationship from a mentorship perspective, one-on-one with other HR executives, that they could utilize stories to really make their relationship stickier and just stronger?
Yeah. So one thing to remember about how the human brain functions, right? When we wrap facts in stories, we are 22 times more likely to remember them. So don't just throw a bunch of statistics, right? Oh, profits are down. Oh, employee churn is at this, or we're hiring at a rate of, 4 new employees per minute, or whatever your statistic is. Apply names, faces, and emotions to them. That's what embeds itself in our brain. So just reeling off a list of statistics is going to allow people to forget them within about 6 minutes of you telling them. So stats without stories equals no memory. That's step one. Step two is connect at the hard parts. Connect at the drama. Where were things go incredibly right? Where did things go incredibly wrong? This is where humans connect. So tell us about a time when something went sideways, and how did you correct it? These are all great interview questions. You probably remember them from when you were recruiting. But tell us about the tough stuff and how you got through it. And then one other thing, what about something really zany and off the wall? What is something that's just like, out of the blue, XYZ happened. I never expected it. Surprise and novelty is something that our human brain is looking for. Hearing the same old thing over and over again also doesn't stick. We search for a commonality in it, but we want newness. So what's novelty? Tell me what's new and different. Those three things, right? Statistics, emotion and drama, and something new. Novelty is what the brain is actively craving.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I recall this research being done for a set of, I guess, people. They were watching commercials, and they were watching a full commercial all the way through, and then they were asked to watch commercials that cut off like 3 seconds short of it finishing. And they asked the participants 2 weeks later which commercials they remembered. It was the ones that they got cut off 3 seconds before they finished that were the most memorable, because people inherently want to have a finishing loop in their mind. And so I see that correlating to surprises, because if you learn a surprising story, something that you weren't expecting, like human brain wants to finish stories. They want everything to kind of click and fall together. If it doesn't do that, it becomes so much more memorable. So I love that idea of telling a zany, off-the-wall story, because that is what's going to stick in the minds of the people you're telling those stories with. But I also love the vulnerability part. Telling stories that make you feel vulnerable, those are the things that make you feel so much better. Like, if you're only looking at people's on like their LinkedIn status updates of like all the great, amazing things that they've done or that they're accomplishing, I mean, it's kind of nice, but it's not going to build a deeper bond between you and them. But if you say, hey, this is where I messed up, like this is where I totally dropped the ball, that makes you relatable. That makes you a human being. And that, I think, is so crucial to building trust in a mentoring relationship.
Right. I mean, think about it. Do we admire the Nobel Prize winner, the Peace Prize winner, because they all won the prize? Or is it what they endured in order to get to that prize? Like, do we admire Nelson Mandela because he's a prize winner, or because he endured 27 years in prison and still managed to be a unifier, right? It's the pain where we connect.
Yeah, no, I love that. That makes a lot of sense. The pain is so critical. And I think that's consistent. I think I've heard this in like sales conversations, but I think selling anybody on any story is common in all themes. People are much more likely to do things to avoid pain than to gain pleasure. And so if you're sharing stories of pain, you are much more likely to think, how can I avoid this for my own self down the line, versus like, look at all the money I made, or look at the promotions I got, or look at all the, how my engagement numbers have increased substantially over this time period. People are much more likely to target onto the pain because they want to avoid that.
Yeah, so Garrett, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What you find with HR leaders is the point where, what's the greatest need in the horizontal mentoring life? Like, where is that pain point, let's say, that two mentors might meet one another?
Well, I think it depends. I think it really kind of depends on every situation in terms of these HR executives going through this. But for horizontal mentoring relationships, I mean, the real key here is that they are able to connect with each other and ask questions. I think this is something you and I have talked about before, of as opposed to saying, if I were in your shoes, this is how I would do it. Talking about things in terms of questions of like, okay, well, this is how it happened. Why did it happen this way? Or can we dig a little bit deeper into that? I find that to be a greater utility of the mentoring relationship. Someone's even compared it to a therapist going to another therapist for therapy. That's kind of what these mentoring relationships are like for these HR executives. And so you are going to someone else who can relate into your shoes, but the key is that you're asking them questions, because just like they're giving you therapy, you are giving them therapy. And if you are intentional about asking these questions that make them feel like, wow, you're really listening to me and you're really digging into the weeds, you're much more likely to build a deeper bond. You're also much more likely to give better advice because you know all the factors that are going on at play.
Yeah. So it's that deep listening that makes all the difference.
So true. Yeah, that's exactly it.
We've talked about it before, is don't should on anybody.
Don't should on anybody is absolutely right. You should this. That is it's the worst. And you said it before, it creates hierarchies and makes you seem like you're better than them. And that's not what we're trying to build in a mentoring relationship, especially horizontal mentoring relationship. You both have gotten to this level as an HR executive for a reason. You didn't get here by accident. So to have the experiences that you had by saying you should do this, kind of, you're almost leveling yourself up against them. And that's not building a deeper bond. It's creating a wedge. We want to avoid that.
That's right.
So I'd love to learn, are there any other tips in terms of innovation storytelling that maybe we haven't talked about in a mentoring relationship, or that maybe HR executives might be like, what can I do right now if I'm an HR executive to start getting this done today? What can I take from this lunch and learn and say, hey, I want to start applying this? How can I go about making a small step towards getting my company to be more, I guess, story focused?
Yeah. So Step one is think about your own story within the company. How'd you get there? Why did you choose to work there? What made working there better than any of the other choices that you had, if you had choices? And now that you're here, what keeps you here? And is that a point of connection where you hear from your fellow employees going, I love it here because, I love it here because. And then the other thing I want you to think about is the future. I stay here because I can't wait to see. I can't wait to find out. I can't wait to uncover what's next. And it's that what next thing that allows us to see ourselves as part of the future of the company. What's coming next? And the role of the HR person and the storyteller for all of us is to allow employees to see themselves as part of the future of the business and invest in that. So think about the difference between liking a post on Facebook versus sharing it. If you can invest in yourself and say, wow, here's this cool initiative coming out from my company, I can't wait to be a part of it. And so I'm not just going to like it, but I see myself in this. I can't wait to climb the ladder. Or I can't wait to participate in an initiative that's doing the following. And the ability for an employee to hit share is your proof point to know that they've invested of themselves, of their own personal brand, into the future of your employer brand. That's huge. So are we giving them the tools and the mechanisms, that verbiage that allows them to say, yes, I buy in. I'm in. I want more people to join. I want more people to come and work here. I want to be a part of that cool new thing. Make sure we're giving people that thing to tweet, that thing to post, asking them what they want to tweet and post, and start surfacing those and sharing those with the rest of the company. Anita in HR, in accounting, can't wait to see what the next rollout is. Here's what she posted today.
That's really cool. That makes a lot of sense. And I know I've spoken about this before. When someone's identity of themselves is directly associated with the company that they work with and work for, they are much more likely to be bought into that culture. And I believe stories are so powerful for accomplishing that. And I think that's a great piece of advice for getting that started in the companies that our HR executives are working with right now. So Susan, you work with both startups and bigger companies. Why is it important for really people in mentoring relationships to meet with people outside of not only their company, but also their industry? Why is it important for people with different backgrounds to be connecting with each other for horizontal mentoring relationships?
Well, in a straightforward response, you can't read the label from inside the jar, right? The problem that you are trying to solve about whatever your issue or initiative is, your view on that problem is myopic in nature because it's only your two eyes and your perspective, where you grew up, where you studied, where you worked, etc. Those are the tools that you have at your disposal. When you open yourself up to diverse networks of people of different ages and backgrounds, races, religions, ethnicities, big companies, small companies, you get to see all facets of the diamond. You get to see different ways of solving a problem. Having participated in lots of mastermind groups, having someone who is a pasta manufacturer sitting next to someone who is a search engine marketer, next to someone who's in construction, next to someone who's in manufacturing aeronautics parts. This described my mastermind group for 10 years. Having those different perspectives as someone who owned a professional services firm was mind-blowing. How someone who has union employees treats those compared to people who have professional managers, on board is very different. And just hearing those other perspectives, you say to yourself, wow, I never knew I could solve the problem that way. And the same holds true for startups and what I like to call grown-ups. Grown-ups are really good at process. Startups suck at process. Startups are really good at acting quickly and nimbly. Grown-ups are really awful. They need to get consensus and buy-in, and you've probably seen it with 500 people CC'd on one email as we wait for everyone to opine on the cool new idea and whether or not that cool new idea is going to be a cool new idea 6 months from now. The startup is able to move, the grown-up is able to ask more questions. And so fusing these two things to say, wow, here's a way that we move quickly. do you think you could short circuit your process if you did it this way? Right? To simply start asking more questions. And it's strange. This is actually how I started working with large companies, is because I would go to speak at conferences for startups, gear all my talks to the startup audience, and it was always corporate executives who would come up to me and say, how do I get this kind of thinking at my business? How do I get it here at Deutsche Bank and PwC and GE? And how do we get this kind of thinking inside of our four walls? And the response was, start talking to more startups. Let's bring the startup thinking in. And it starts small. So that mentoring relationship says, here's the incredible experience I have to bring. Let me listen and share with you what my experience is. Not you should. Let me share with you what we've done before.
That's awesome. That makes a lot of sense. Essentially, people with different, I guess, whether it be size of company perspectives or industry perspectives, can provide a different lens into how to go about solving problems, as well as questions that should be asked that need to be answered. And ultimately, they might shake something loose that maybe you hadn't considered before, because if we're only used to running with the same circles where we've been grown accustomed to, we're only going to get the same exact advice each and every time. So by having mentors in different industries, by having mentors that are outside of the normal people we run with, it allows us to learn so many new things. I love that perspective. So Susan, this has been excellent. I've loved chatting with you about innovation storytelling for our HR executives watching here. How can our HR executives connect with you, learn more about you? What is going on next with your world, Susan?
Yeah, so I'm really excited. I'm publishing a book called Innovation Storytelling, Getting the Resources, Runway, and Recognition You Deserve. That's going to be coming out in August, but folks can find out more on susanlindner.com and pre-order there. I'm also really like to extend a session of innovation storytelling to all the HR talent and development executives on the listening to the podcast today. And you can schedule a free 30-minute session with me, and I'd be happy to talk with you about your own innovation storytelling. Just go to schedulesusan.com and book a time with me. I would love to chat with you about the next new process or rollout or initiative that you're working on, and how to get your leaders to become better storytellers.
Awesome. Well, hey, Susan, thanks for being here. This was an awesome Lunch and Learn. Everybody, thank you all for being here. See you all next month.
Thanks, Garrett.